Oregon's defensive line is a reason they can win the national championship this year. That's the best unit Oregon's got. But which one needs to improve the most down the stretch?
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time. Once again, for Locked On Ducks, I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. This episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, where you can get a big return. New customers place a $5 bet and you'll get 150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Lots to get to today. Should we care who wins between Ohio State and Indiana? Does it matter even? And some thoughts on hoops and let's just say something funny that I saw. All coming up on today's show. But Oregon's defensive line is as I hyped it up to be before the season. Best I've ever seen for the Ducks. Doesn't mean that the best individual players I've ever seen for the Ducks are on the defensive line. There are a lot of really good ones, though. I don't know where Matayo's going to fall. By the time his Oregon career comes to a close, boy, it feels like he's going to be really, really high. But when I think during this bye week, which position groups have been the best, my mind immediately, without question, no hesitation, went to the defensive line. Not just because of the production that they have had, but because someone who I talked about earlier this week could arguably be Oregon's best defensive player hasn't played all the time. There is no other group. Think about the wide receiver room, for instance. So Tez Johnson goes out with an injury against Michigan, and the wide receivers play great. And in the next two games, Oregon's passing attack isn't the same. It's one of many reasons we're all happy to have Tez Johnson back going into the Washington game next week. But that's what usually happens in a position group. If you took Jabbar Muhammad out of the corners, do you think Oregon's pass coverage would be quite as blanket as it has been so far this season? I imagine it wouldn't. It could still be good, but it wouldn't be as good. The amazing thing about this Oregon defensive line that has surpassed even the expectation I had for it is in those games where Burch has been out, I would have understood, maybe a little bit of a drop-off. Maybe you're missing a play here or there. But it feels like they just don't skip a beat. They just, Matayo ups his play a little bit, Tatum Tuioti plays more, and somehow everything remains the same with regards to how Oregon gets pushed around or a lack thereof in the run game, pressures they create. They're one of the best in the entire country at batting balls down at the line of scrimmage. They're just exceptionally good. So when I think best position group that Oregon has had so far this season, I immediately go to the defensive line. And frankly, I don't know that it's close. I don't know. You let me know which position group you would say is the best that isn't the defensive line. You can make a case for wide receiver. Heck, you can maybe make a case for tight end, but I feel stronger about the quality of depth on Oregon's defensive line than the tight end room. Receiver could be close. I still put it at the defensive line pretty quickly. So that's one of the reasons that Oregon is in this national championship pushing, contending position that they're in right now, because their defense is there every single week. Offense has an off day against Wisconsin. That's okay. Defense will carry the way. They tried a fake field goal. It didn't work. That's okay. The defensive line. Remember, the secondary, of course, with good coverage on the back end, but Braden Locke was trying to throw a pass, and Caldwell bats it in the air. Matayo catches it, goes down, boom, game over. Those guys have been good situationally. They have been consistent. They're deep. Absolutely love them. But then I got to thinking, well, where's Oregon weakest? And this is a relative weakness. I want to make that very clear so that everybody doesn't get all hot and bothered in the comment section, even though it may appear sometimes like I'm trying to invoke a response. I'm not always trying to do that. Maybe every now and then. Maybe. I said maybe, not guaranteed. But when you look at where Oregon is at offensively, they've been very good. Not as good as last year. I didn't expect them to be. I said coming into the season, hey, I don't think they're going to be as good as they were last year, but they'll still be really good. I don't think Dylan Gabriel's as good as Bo Nix, but he's still really good. And there's enough there for Oregon to contend for and win a national championship. I think that's played itself out on the field so far this season. I can't go to a whole position group here because my answer, if I were to go to a whole position group to Oregon's weakest unit, has been the offensive line. I don't even think that, I think that sounds controversial on the one hand, because they're a finalist once again with like 9 other schools for the Joe Moore Award nationally. as great as it is to see him getting that level of recognition, I think they are not as deep or talented as they were last year, particularly on the interior. And I think that recognition is being carried by 3 guys, and only 2 of them are along the offensive line. That's Johnny Cornelius and Josh Connerly, the 2 tackles who are probably playing in the NFL next season, and Dylan Gabriel himself, who's gotten away from some sacks. But when this is the unit that I'd look to, and if you think I'm wrong, by all means, shoot me a note on Twitter, drop a YouTube comment, become a Locked On Ducks insider, and let's chat whatever you think, if you think I'm crazy here. But I challenge you to go to a unit this year that has consistently delivered as many problems to a particular side of the ball as Oregon's offensive line has. I didn't think they created a lot of... I almost went running back here. Jordan James has been spectacular, but we've seen Noah Whittington up and down, and has had some really good moments, and then it has moments where you're like, okay, please put Jordan James back in because I'd like to be able to run the football. It's been up and down. I think that's as much a reflection of the offensive line as it is the guys you have handing the ball to for Dylan Gabriel. So that's why I landed on the offensive line. Running backs were a close second, and we haven't seen a third guy emerge. Like Jaden Lamar has played here and there. It's been pretty patchwork, but if you lost one of Oregon's top 2 running backs, either Whittington or James, you'd either have a huge, huge responsibility put on Jordan James' shoulders, or you feel like you'd be missing a guy who has been at times the offensive MVP for the Ducks this season. Last year, you lose your number 2 running back and there's no drop-off. Jordan James was sensational behind Bucky Irving, who was a 1,000-yard rusher, and Jordan James, a 1,000-yard rusher. So that's why I came down on the offensive line. Again, relative weakness, but compared to the rest of Oregon's team this year, I think they're the group that has had the most consistent deficiencies throughout the year. Because don't forget, the first 2 games count, and they were straight up bad. And against Wisconsin, I did not think they played very well. So that's 3 games that I can think to easily, with a number of recognizable examples to all Oregon fans who've watched those games, as to why the offensive line was not playing the way Oregon needed it to. How many other position groups can you do that with? How many? The answer is not very many. So this is a good problem for Oregon to have. It's a great problem for Oregon to have because it's really not a problem. This is where they're at. I just got thinking about it because, well, yeah, defensive line, that's obviously number 1. But what's on the other end of the spectrum? I think it's the offensive line. And I would love to see Marcus Harper get healthy and for them to get back to what they kind of were in the middle of the season up until this past week. And I thought they were pretty good against Maryland. Not great, but pretty good. And I'm waiting for them to have that game where I feel like they play great. Like against Ohio State, that's a great game. That was a great game. Against Michigan, that's a great game. When does that performance show up again? If it does, I think you'll see Oregon's offense fully figure itself out. If you think I'm nuts, by all means, let me know in the YouTube comments or hit me up on Twitter at @SMcLaughlinCFB or @LockedOnDucks. Ohio State, Indiana, big game. Winner plays Oregon in the Big Ten championship game. Should we care? I mean, yes and no. I'll tell you what you should watch for, though. That's coming up next. First, let's talk about Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings. Yeah, those numbers are real. Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. You can run your game all season long on Prize Picks. And with as few as 4 correct picks, you can win 100 times your money. I mean, come on, where are you going to find an offer as good as that? And Prize Picks now offers Venmo for quick and easy deposits and withdrawals into your accounts this sports season so they can make it really simple for you. That's why Prize Picks is the place to go. You can pick someone like Jamar Chase over 79.5 receiving yards. That's usually a very good selection there. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use code LOCKEDONCollege. Get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Download the Prize Picks app. Use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. So Indiana and Ohio State play a big game. The winner will, in all likelihood, face Oregon in the Big Ten championship game, where they have, in fact, secured their spot, which we found out on Tuesday from the Big Ten because, well, tiebreakers are complicated, so why don't we cut them some slack? But Oregon would, of course, prefer to beat Washington either way and face who? Indiana? Ohio State? Couple of things to watch. First of all, if you did not know, Ohio State starting center Seth McLaughlin, no relation, has torn his Achilles, unfortunately, and he is out for the year. So Ohio State has done some reshuffling along their offensive line. They are moving last year's starting center from left guard over to center and then making a different selection at the left guard spot. Now, Jay Stevens of Locked On Buckeyes, I talked to him about this over in Locked On College Football. He feels really good about that particular move and feels like they're very capable. We shall see how that plays out. Jacob Goins of Locked On Hoosiers, meanwhile, said in the very same segment, Buckeye fans are telling me in my comment section that they don't feel good about it at all. So that makes me think, well, sometimes fans can be a little over the top, but Jay's a straight shooter. You guys remember from that week leading up to it and the shows we did over the summer? Jay will tell it like it is. Jay, before the year, thought Oregon would beat Ohio State. Then the week of the game, he tucked himself into Oregon losing to Ohio State, but of course, well, that did not take place. Now, was that a ridiculous prediction? No, of course not. Oregon won by a point. But before the season, my conference championship predictions were Oregon and Ohio State meeting in the neutral field, and I thought Oregon would win in Eugene. And before the season, I haven't made a pick for the Big Ten championship game. Want to make that clear. But before the season, I thought Ohio State would probably get them back on the neutral field. Because when you have two teams that are going to play single-digit, one-possession games, you're probably going to split them. Take Oregon at home, Ohio State in the neutral site. That's still an incredibly feasible possibility. But whether or not Oregon fans should be rooting for a particular team in this game, I don't think is the right way of looking at it. By the fourth quarter, you might know whether there's a team that you'd want to win. Because, of course, there are two different outcomes here. Either Oregon is going to play a team that you feel like is going to beat the Ducks because they haven't figured out their issues from Wisconsin in the Washington game, or you feel like it might not matter, or some of you out there, several of you, as a matter of fact, have sent me messages saying, hey, should Oregon just want the 5 seed? Should they try to lose, not try to lose the Big Ten championship game, but is that a feasible path? Well, yes, it is. Getting the 5 seed would allow you to play the 12 seed, whoever that is. Now, previously we would have said, well, that's going to be the Group of 5 conference champion. I don't know about that. Based on the latest rankings, Boise State controls their own path to be the 4 seed. But still, if they were to get a bye as the Mountain West champion and you were the 5 seed, you'd play the 12 seed, whoever that would be. You'd play them at home at Autzen Stadium and then play Boise State in the quarterfinals and then play whoever you have to play in the semifinals. But going back to the Ohio State-Indiana question, as you watch the game, you may feel, boy, I feel like one team's more beatable than the other. Boy, I feel like this. I think Oregon would match up better with this team, or Oregon would match up better with that team in the Big Ten championship game, so I want that team to win. Let's say, hypothetically, it's Indiana. On paper, that's the answer to the question. They throw the ball a lot, they run it a little, and Oregon's had one of the best pass defenses in the country this year, and, well, I feel really good about Oregon's defensive line against anyone, including Ohio State. So I'm curious to see how Indiana's offensive line, which has been a very underrated unit this year, I'm curious to see how they match up with Ohio State's defensive line. But I'm watching that Buckeyes offensive line. Because if they struggle with Indiana, then I'll feel supremely confident no matter who Oregon faces. And yeah, based on how Oregon plays against Washington, that'll be the ultimate determining factor for, well, how are we going to feel going into the Big Ten title game? Depends on how they play. Can they look like the team that beat Illinois 38-9 and Michigan 38-17, or are they going to look like a team that committed 12 penalties against Maryland and needed a late field goal to beat Wisconsin, albeit on the road, for their 8th straight game with Wisconsin at home off a bye? But again, if Oregon had played a better game against Wisconsin, it didn't have to be that particularly close. Should we worry about this? I'm sure some of you will be upset that I'm even talking about it. That's okay. You can feel however you want. But matchups, at the end of the day, have prevented teams that we don't think about from winning a national championship. What if Alabama had lost a game to Auburn last year and they don't play Georgia in the SEC championship game? Who would Georgia have played? I don't remember. Do you think they would have beaten them? Or do you think it was just Nick Saban that was able to beat Kirby Smart? What happens then if Georgia wins the SEC? Do they go on to win the national championship? So these sorts of things can snowball. They can absolutely matter. But I'm curious to see how that Ohio State offensive line is holding up. That's what I'm most watching for. At the end of the day, do I have a preference between the two? No. Because I think that if Oregon plays the way they're capable of, they can beat either one of those teams, even on a neutral site. I know Oregon scraped by Ohio State, but let's not forget, they shouldn't have had their first 7 points, and Oregon came up empty in the red zone, and Oregon missed a field goal, and Oregon left 2 points out there with a missed extra point and then a failed 2-point conversion in the first half. A lot of things didn't go Oregon's way. They found a way to win the game. Now, they also kicked the ball off the Altman and recovered it to get an extra 3 points back, but I don't anticipate that happening again, per se, in the Big Ten championship game. But still, if you tally up the total number of breaks that Oregon got in that October 12th matchup with the Buckeyes, a lot more went Ohio State's way than didn't. But still, can Ohio State beat Oregon? Yes. Could Oregon beat Ohio State? Absolutely. But with this Oregon defensive line, as I talked about earlier on the show, being the unquestioned strength, not just of the defense, but I think of the entire team. Like, I think that's where Dan Lanning and Tosh Lupoy want the identity of this team to be. That's what they saw when they were at their previous stops, winning national championships in the SEC. I think that's what they are building. I think that's what they have built. I think that's what this defensive line is. It is a 3-year process of recruiting and portaling and developing to get guys in there and say, okay, now we can go 6, 7, 8 deep and have a high level of production to be completely disruptive and not have to blitz all the time with linebackers and DBs as our only way of getting pressure on the quarterback. That is paramount to any great defense. You can always get pressure with 4. And Oregon has gotten pressure with 4 a lot this season. Turns out that helps your secondary a whole heck of a lot. So if Ohio State's offensive line struggles with Indiana, that will absolutely boost my confidence level. They'll have another game to get it right because they play Michigan next week, but that's the biggest thing that I look at as we kind of glance ahead to the Big Ten championship game of, does Oregon play this team or that team? Like, if it's Ohio State again, Oregon won the trenches. Oregon was able to protect Dylan Gabriel. Will Howard was sacked a few times, but Ohio State couldn't run the ball when they wanted to. And Oregon hit downfield shots, but they had time in the pocket for Dylan Gabriel to hit those shots. What happens in the second go-round if Ohio State's offensive line is significantly hindered without their starting center? I mean, think about what it would mean to this Oregon offensive line if Poncho went down with an injury. They'd be going back to Charlie Pickard, and you might see a lot of the same problems that you had earlier this year. So that's the number one thing that I'm looking for. Between Indiana and Ohio State, I frankly don't have a strong preference. There are strengths and advantages. On paper, Indiana is the team that is quote-unquote more beatable, but guess what? I think Curtis Rourke is more dangerous than Will Howard. Ohio State's receivers are more dangerous than Indiana's, but I'd rather face dangerous receivers with a good quarterback than solid receivers with a great quarterback. So this question also came in from Dylan. I wanted to answer. Who is the one team you really don't want to play? For me, Georgia still just sticks out. Also, is it hard rooting for the Mariners and Seahawks knowing who they share the city with? It's actually not, because anytime I'm in a space where I'm rooting for the Seahawks or the Mariners, nobody's got college sports on their mind. Doesn't matter. Just like the beauty of Oregon sports. When you see someone who's a Duck fan, you know nothing about them except you're a Duck fan, and that's good enough for me. So the one team that sticks out to me is absolutely Georgia. They stick out second because the team that sticks out first to me is Alabama, and it's just because of their head coach. And there are a number of really good teams out there, but I don't fully trust Quinn Ewers at Texas. I definitely don't trust Penn State a whole heck of a lot. Georgia and Alabama, because of who they've got at head coaches and the caliber of athlete on average that is on those particular rosters, those are the teams to me that as you start to play out all these bracket scenarios, I wouldn't want to play them. I've seen Lanning against DeBoer before with Washington's roster, and Washington's roster was really good. Got news for you, that Alabama roster doesn't stink. Curious to see how they do against Oklahoma this week, but yeah, those are the teams that stick out to me. And that sounds kind of chalk-ish, but guess what? I think they've got the best coaches out there. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments or hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter. Basketball, of the Oregon variety, of course, took on Oregon State. Do I have thoughts on last night's game? Why, yes. Yes, I do. And something you're going to laugh at. That's coming up next. First, let's talk about Zbiotics. Zbiotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists. They're really smart to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make Zbiotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. As someone who has personal experience with this product, let me tell you, it's phenomenal. You'll feel great during, you'll feel great after, you will feel great the very next day as well. And that's what people often care about most. Go to zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege to learn more. Get 15% off your first order when you use Locked On College at checkout. Zbiotics is back with a 100% money back guarantee. So if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege. Use code LockedOnCollege at checkout for 15% off. And then go check out our friends at FanDuel. That's America's #1 sportsbook. Just like Oregon is the #1 ranked team in all of college football right now. And they have been for a while. Feels good. Job's not finished. Dan Lanning will tell you that. But anything that you want is available over at FanDuel. And new customers right now can bet $5 and get 150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. And yes, you can bet college football too. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get 150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. FanDuel.com, that's the place to go. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So I have many thoughts. Let me give you a little peek behind the curtain here. If that tease on the other side of the ad break sounded a little generic or so, it's because I recorded those first two segments before watching Oregon play Oregon State. I knew I was going to have thoughts either way. I knew that I wasn't going to be able to come on here and say Oregon routed Oregon State. It never goes that way at Gill Coliseum. Well, it didn't last night either. So Oregon wins 78-75. And I'm just sitting here laughing, not at Oregon State, at the fact that Oregon won the basketball game. They are still the only program in the country that has an undefeated women's basketball who beat Auburn. We beat Auburn in something. Look at that. Who beat Auburn the other day. Women's basketball, men's basketball, football, undefeated. Only athletic department in the country. So it's a good time right now. Good time. I want to shout out three guys. Bam Tracy, 2 free throws late in the game. Huge. On the road, Oregon State had a record student attendance, and yet Bam Tracy was absolutely unfazed. Nate Biddle, a career-high 23 points. He has got no left hand to speak of. He can't even turn left, but he can really score. He can really score. His shooting is still coming along, but down low, that guy is as skilled as any low-post scoring big Oregon has had in the last 15 years. Maybe the most skilled. Like, he's not as big and imposing as Dante, but he has got far more skill. And there were times in this game where Oregon missed in Folly Dante. Their inability to get a defensive rebound was infuriating. Absolutely infuriating. But it got better in the second half. The third guy is Jackson Shellstad. So for those who haven't followed along with all 5 of Oregon men's basketball games so far this season, they're 5-0. That's not going to last very long because they're not playing great basketball, but the good news is they're winning these games, so they're not getting punished in their quest to be an at-large team, lest they be forced to win the Big Ten tournament championship in order to get into the NCAA tournament. Be nice to just do it the simple way, but it is really good to be winning these games. Really good. Jackson Shellstad, through the first 4 games, had been shooting 30% from the field and 16% from 3. He was struggling in this game. He's just missing shots that we're used to seeing him hit. And then all of a sudden, the fourth quarter, it's 2 halves in men's basketball, of course, but the fourth quarter rolled around, and all of a sudden, Jackson Shellstad said, all right, I'm the West Linn kid who went to Oregon. I'm sure Oregon State offered him, but probably wouldn't have had a chance because he was too big of a prospect. I'm winning this basketball game. He scores 11 points in the final, I think about 7 minutes. He hits 3 triples, left corner, left wing, right corner, and then he hits a tough, and I mean a tough, floater to put Oregon up by 3 late. So big time performances from those 3 guys. That's the good news, is Oregon won. It was on the road. If you ever worry about a team being battle tested, just look at the Portland game, look at the Oregon State game, and you can know, they've played in close games. So tight matchups in Big Ten play, which are certainly going to arise, it won't be their first time experiencing that. That's the good news. Here's the bad news. At the moment, they are not playing a sustainable brand of basketball. They have twice now overcome double-digit deficits in one half of basketball against Portland and against Oregon State. Now, I felt better about the Oregon State game than the Portland one, but there was an aspect in both games of, boy, Portland State has banked in 2 threes, or Oregon State was scrambling on this possession and hit a tough 2. Eventually, those shots stopped going in. But Oregon gave up 47 points defensively in the first half to the Beavs. They were on track. James Crepea had the stat on Twitter. They were on pace. It did not result that way. They were on pace to give up the most points to the Beavs in 30 years. It was a really poor defensive performance. And I tweeted out at halftime that that's probably going to make Dana Altman want to break a clipboard or 7. In the second half, they gave up 28 points. That's what this team could be. Nate Biddle had a bunch of block shots, did much better on the defensive rebounding department. That's where Oregon misses Dante the most, is he was automatic on the boards and a big defensive presence. But KJ Evans does great things defensively when he is on the court. He's not playing as much as we maybe thought he would coming into the year, because Bam Tracy is just doing a lot of nice things for the Ducks right now, and that's just how the rotations have worked. But when Evans is on the court, his defensive effort is really, really strong. I think that Evans' reduced minutes and Tracy's increased minutes are leading to a less successful defensive effort. But it gives Oregon more athleticism and scoring at the other end. Now, Evans can move, of course, but he's not like Bam Tracy, who, as I said, hit those big free throws late in the game, which was really good because he'd missed a layup that would have given Oregon a 3-point lead a little bit earlier. But there are things to like. It's starting to kind of come together. Jackson Shellstad is not going to be a woefully inefficient player and a poor shooter of the basketball for an entire season. Like, that's not going to last. That's not my concern. My concern is that Oregon is waiting until the second half to wake up pretty often. They didn't do it against Montana or UC Riverside or anything like that, but it's happened several times, and that's got to be fixed. Now, the history with Dana Altman teams, for those of us basketball diehards like myself know, they play their best basketball in February and March, and they play their worst basketball in November and December. And so far, they have weathered that storm. The question is whether they are going to correct those mistakes. The depth on this team is considerably stronger than a year ago. The length, the shooting, there's the pieces I talked about before the year that had me excited for this team are all there. The reason they are not playing well is they just don't have a lot of juice in the first half. They come out flat, they wait to get down, and then they lock in. And it's not an uncommon thing in college basketball. I see it all over the place. I call a lot of college basketball games at varying levels, and guess what? It's a problem when you're dealing with college kids that a lot of different coaches, including really good ones, have to battle with. But if Oregon can find a way to take these second halves and make them their first half, you will have more games like Montana and UC Riverside where, yeah, you're favored and you're going to go out and win big. That's what I'd like to see. But this is got the negative out of the way. The problems are there to address. But much like Oregon football, I would far prefer, whatever. I don't know. English is a dumb language, as I often say. I would rather see Oregon have to work on these things to get easier wins than to turn losses into wins. So that's where they're at. 78-75. 3 straight times in Gill Coliseum, absolute heartbreak for the Beavs. Last year, the Dante dunk, the Rivaldo Soares 3, Eric Williams before that, 4 straight. 4 straight times they have lost at home to the Ducks by less than 5 points. That can't feel great, but it feels good for Oregon. Lastly, something that I know plenty of you will find humorous given last year's Colorado affiliation. Of course, they're in the Big 12 now. So Ziyare Addison Oregon 4-star offensive tackle commit in the class of 2025. He's been moving up the rankings a little bit, and after Juju Lewis, who is one of the top quarterbacks, there was a lot of quarterback movement in the high school ranks yesterday. So the top quarterback, Bryce Underwood, he flipped from LSU to Michigan. That was big news, and Dave Portnoy was going nuts. And then Juju Lewis, who had decommitted from USC, committed to Colorado. And so then on Instagram, someone was was mentioning Ziyare Addison, saying, "Oh, you're next, man. You're next." And he posted a reply that said, "Yep." And everyone was like, oh my gosh. And then 1 minute later, from the time the first comment was posted, he said, "Psych, Shold Ducks." In that 1 minute, who else but a Colorado fan account, I don't even know his name, I don't care, was able to screenshot that comment and tweet it out and say, "Here's what Ziyare Addison is saying after the commitment of Juju Lewis to Colorado." And then Ziyare Addison quoted the tweet and was like, "Yeah, you left out the rest of the comments, dude." So Ziyare Addison, just for that, I don't care which fan base it happened to be. I'm sure people will enjoy that it's the Buffs, and of course I did at some level too. But that's an elite level troll job there from an 18-year-old. So he's already my favorite Oregon offensive tackle ever. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.